In Get Smart, Brian Tracy invites the reader into a world where thinking is not merely automatic, but strategic, sharp, and consciously directed. He argues that the difference between an ordinary life and an extraordinary one is not luck, circumstance, or talent. It is the quality of thought. The book presents a clear and compelling promise. If you can change the way you think, you can change everything else. Tracy explains that our minds run on two modes: reactive thinking, which responds emotionally and impulsively, and proactive thinking, which analyzes, plans, and chooses wisely. Most people live in permanent reaction mode, responding to problems, setbacks, and temptations without pausing to think. Smart thinking, he insists, is a skill, a discipline that elevates decision-making, intensifies focus, and turns setbacks into strategic leverage. Through real-world observations, psychological insights, and life-tested strategies, the author shows how mindset shapes habit, habit shapes daily action, and action shapes destiny. To think better is, quite simply, to live better. Tracy doesn't call for more effort, more hours, or more stress. He calls for smarter mental frameworks, deeper reflection, and intentional choices that align with long-term meaning rather than short-term impulse. This is not a book about information, but transformation. It is an invitation to step back from noise, speed, and mental clutter and reclaim the steering wheel of your mind. If thinking determines outcome, then thinking smarter is not optional. It is the fundamental tool of personal power. If this journey into sharper thinking inspires you, like this video and subscribe to Read and Rise to continue exploring the books that reshape how we see life, develop our minds, and design our futures.
Chapter 1: The Power of Thinking. Upgrade. Brian Tracy opens the first chapter with a direct principle. Your outer world is nothing more than a mirror of your inner world. The results you see, the opportunities you attract, and even the obstacles you repeatedly face are shaped by the way you interpret events and respond to them. Life in this view isn't simply happening to you, it is being constructed by you, thought by thought. Tracy explains that the brain is wired to conserve energy, which means it prefers habitual thinking over reflective thinking. Most people move through their days on mental autopilot, repeating ideas installed by family, environment, culture, and early life experiences. These inherited beliefs often operate without resistance, silently guiding choices, limiting ambition, and setting ceilings on personal achievement. To get smart, one must first get conscious. At this stage, Tracy doesn't ask the reader to become a different person overnight. He asks for something more subtle and far more powerful. Pause before reacting. Create a space, not big, just a breath's width, between stimulus and response. In that space lies the beginning of intelligent decision-making. When you step back, analyze, question, and compare options, you shift from a reactive thinker to a strategic thinker. He insists that success is rarely a product of speed, but almost always a result of clarity. Fast thinkers rush into emotional choices, while smart thinkers take the time to evaluate consequences, long-term effects, and real priorities. The tragedy, he notes, is that many people waste years solving the wrong problems simply because they never learned how to evaluate what truly matters. To think better is to interrogate assumptions. Why do I believe this? Who taught me this? Is this conclusion based on evidence or habit? Smart thinking doesn't eliminate emotion, but it prevents emotion from becoming the commander. It transforms instinct into insight and urgency into direction. Tracy closes the chapter with a liberating idea. You are not trapped by the mind you inherited. Intelligence is not fixed. Clarity is trainable. Wisdom is a discipline. The more you challenge automatic thoughts, the more your brain adapts, rewires, and expands. In fact, every deliberate choice to think slowly rather than react quickly builds the very muscles of mental advantage that define successful lives. This is the threshold of the journey he promises, one where thought becomes craft, awareness becomes strength, and life takes shape not by accident, but by design.
Chapter 2. Your mind as a precision instrument. Train it, don't trust it raw. Brian Tracy treats the mind not as a mystical force, but as a programmable device. Left unattended, it defaults to fear, repetition, comfort, and imitation. Trained deliberately, it becomes strategic, inventive, and remarkably accurate. The second chapter revolves around one central thesis. Most people don't think, they react. Thought requires effort, structure, and inspection. Reaction requires only habit. Tracy challenges the assumption that intelligence alone leads to good decisions. What matters more is organized intelligence, the ability to sort information, compare outcomes, and recognize patterns of consequence. A smart mind can destroy its owner if undisciplined. A trained mind, even if modest in talent, can outperform genius. He proposes 3 tools of mental refinement. 1. Question the premise. Almost every mistake in judgment begins with an unquestioned starting point. If a goal feels impossible, Tracy says to ask, is it truly impossible or simply assumed so because of old beliefs? Clarity begins where assumption ends. 2. Pursue strategic ignorance. Not ignorance in the sense of lacking knowledge, rather the art of ignoring the unnecessary. Most failures are not the result of incapacity, but distraction. You do not have to know everything, you must know what matters. 3. Separate emotion from evaluation. Feelings are signals, not verdicts. Let instinct alert you, but let analysis decide. Tracy isn't advocating emotional coldness, he's advocating emotional hierarchy. Emotions may speak first, but they must not speak last. Mental mastery, in his view, is not about controlling thought, but curating it, keeping what sharpens you, discarding what weakens you. The mind is clay, memory is water, attention is heat. The sculpture is your life. A precise mind creates a precise existence. The more you refine how you think, the easier everything else becomes. Leadership, planning, communication, wealth, even happiness. None of these can exceed the quality of their source, thought. This sets the stage for Tracy's next concern, how to turn refined thinking into high-quality decisions so that life is not a series of reactions, but a sequence of deliberate moves. Chapter 3. Clear decisions, clean results. The discipline of decisive thinking. Brian Tracy insists that success is less a product of intelligence and more a product of decision hygiene. If the mind is the factory, then decisions are its manufactured goods. When the process is sloppy, so are the outcomes. He begins with a sobering observation. Most people postpone decisions because they fear consequences more than they value progress. Indecision, in Tracy's definition, is not neutrality, but decay. A delayed choice is still a choice toward stagnation, confusion, and lost momentum. He outlines the anatomy of a smart decision with almost surgical clarity. 1. Define the decision before making it. A large portion of mistakes stem from deciding without naming the decision itself. Tracy urges the reader to specify the frame. Are you deciding to commit, to withdraw, to invest, to stop, or simply to experiment? A decision without a boundary becomes a psychological fog. 2. Estimate consequences, not wishes. Wishes are delightful, but structurally useless. He encourages replacing the sentence, "I hope this works," with a sharper one. What will this cost if it works? What will it cost if it doesn't? Good decisions are measured not by imagined gains, but by tolerable losses. 3. Act while the mind is clear. Once clarity is reached, hesitation corrupts it. The world during clarity and the world during doubt are two different landscapes. Delay lets fear edit the logic. Tracy is not romantic about decisiveness. He does not treat decision-making as a mystical performance, but as a repeatable skill, built through 3 routines. 1. Short deadlines for minor choices. Limit the energy spent on things that won't matter in a month. 2. Written pros and cons for major ones. Thoughts on paper are harder to lie to than thoughts in the head. 3. Reversal clauses when possible. If an option can be undone, the burden of perfection dissolves. He also warns against decision fatigue, the slow erosion of judgment caused by too many trivial selections. When the brain wastes precision on crumbs, it has no sharpness left for mountains. Tracy advises automating the predictable so you can think about the meaningful. At the heart of the chapter lies a simple law. Clarity creates courage. People do not fear decisions, they fear the invisible. Name the risk, price it, choose, and move. This chapter closes the loop between thought and action. Smart thinking without execution is sterile. Decisions without structure are reckless. Tracy's formula is the marriage of the two. Structured thought, executed without hesitation. The next chapter transitions from personal decision quality to strategic priority, how to ensure that what you choose to do is actually worth doing. Chapter 4. The Quiet Power of Priority. Brian Tracy turns in this chapter from the broad landscape of decision-making to the intimate architecture of focus. He insists that success is not merely a matter of choosing the right direction, but of continually returning to it with discipline, even when the world lures the mind toward noise, novelty, and unfinished intentions. To him, the tragedy of modern ambition is not that people aim too low, but that they aim everywhere at once. He begins by exposing a habit that feels productive, but is, in truth, deeply corrosive: the busy life. Most people drown not in deep, demanding projects, but in shallow obligations that expand just enough to occupy the day while changing nothing in the long arc of a life. It is possible, Tracy writes, to be constantly in motion and perpetually off course. He warns that the greatest enemy of meaningful achievement is not failure, but distraction disguised as responsibility. Priority, in Tracy's thinking, is a principle of honest mathematics. A small number of efforts produce the overwhelming majority of results. Yet it is precisely the high-impact work, writing the chapter, building the business, doubling down on a core skill, that we most skillfully avoid. We retreat, instead, to what is easy, quick, repeatable, and safe. The inbox, the minor errand, the administrative shuffle, these become a refuge from the discomfort of necessary effort. In doing so, people exchange significance for momentum, depth for constant interruption. Tracy refuses to soften this truth. He suggests that a person who tries to do everything becomes a curator of fragments, half-started ideas, abandoned projects, gestures that gesture toward progress without ever arriving there. Completion, he argues, has spiritual force. It clarifies the mind and trains the will. Every finished task strengthens a kind of inner authority. Every delayed or scattered one weakens it. The heart of his message is elegantly simple, yet psychologically demanding. Choose one vital task and move it forward before allowing the day to scatter. Not 2, not a dozen, not a list of noble intentions, but one. He compares this discipline to training the muscle of attention. A mind stretched across too many points becomes threadbare. A mind directed toward a single purposeful act gains concentration and, with it, confidence. The chapter also offers a subtle reframing of procrastination. Tracy does not treat it as weakness or moral failure, but as an indicator of confusion. When a task remains impossible to begin, the mind is usually unclear about its true importance or the immediate step that would make it less daunting. Clarity then becomes a solvent, Break the large intention into simple, undeniable motion. Begin small if you must, but begin. More than time, he emphasizes energy. The most valuable work should be done when the mind is awake, fresh, and capable of deep reasoning, not when it is already exhausted by the trivial things. To place meaningful labor at the edges of one's day is to declare, quietly and repeatedly, that it is not truly meaningful. A person's real priorities are not written in their plans, Tracy suggests, but in the hours where they spend their strength. In the end, priority is not a technique, but a worldview. It asks a stark question: what deserves the best of you? Not merely your attention, but your sharpest hours, your unbroken thought, your unfragmented effort. Central tasks, Tracy reminds us, shape identity. To prioritize is to define who you are becoming. To scatter attention is to allow accident and urgency to shape you instead. The chapter closes with a sober, empowering idea. The mind is a steward of its own direction. Focus is not enforced by the world. It must be chosen daily against the world's appetite for your time. And in that choice, quiet, repeated, disciplined, the future is organized. From here, Tracy turns toward the inner barriers that sabotage commitment, the subtle habits, distractions, and psychological resistances that tempt us away from the work we claim to value.
Chapter 5. The Inner Saboteur. In this chapter, Brian Tracy shifts from the external mechanics of planning and prioritizing to the quiet battlefield within the mind. He observes, with clinical clarity, that knowing what matters is rarely the problem. Sustaining belief in oneself while pursuing it is the true challenge. Human beings are not undone by lack of information, but by doubt. Slow, invisible, and persuasive. Tracy begins with a simple assertion that carries the weight of modern psychology. The greatest barriers to achievement are the stories individuals tell themselves about their limitations. These narratives, once repeated enough, take on the texture of truth. They become identity. A person who once tried and failed in youth calls himself unlucky in midlife. Someone who stumbled once in public speaking quietly claims the title of not confident. Through repetition, the mind confuses habit with essence. He describes self-sabotage not as a dramatic force, but as a subtle decay. It is the thought that whispers later, the hesitation that turns opportunities into regrets, the practiced instinct to shrink before something demanding. Tracy is unapologetic in his diagnosis. The mind, left untrained, will argue endlessly for comfort. It will praise safety, reward postponement, and cultivate excuses as if they were virtues. He explains that fear is not the enemy. Fear is simply the signal that one has reached the frontier of personal growth. What destroys progress is the interpretation of fear, when the mind translates discomfort into impossibility. Growth requires friction. Ambition requires exposure. Yet the inner saboteur is fluent in the language of retreat. It will insist that the timing is not right, that more preparation is needed, that one more reassuring distraction must be completed first. Tracy's remedy is at once psychological and practical. He insists on disciplined self-talk, not affirmation in the shallow, decorative sense, but a deliberate rebuilding of the internal voice. The human mind listens to itself with surprising loyalty. When it hears, "you can," possibility becomes a living posture rather than a distant idea. When it hears, "you are not enough," the world shrinks to the shape of that sentence. He gives considerable attention to the environment, not in terms of physical space, but in the ecosystem of influence. People, conversations, workplaces, even the tone of everyday interactions
They sculpt thought more reliably than intention. The individual who surrounds himself with cynics inevitably becomes hesitant. The one who walks daily with builders becomes slowly a builder. The saboteur inside the mind often borrows the vocabulary of those outside it. This chapter also explores the moral fatigue of comparison. Tracy points gently but firmly to a modern paradox. The more individuals observe each other's curated triumphs, the more they privately nurture a sense of deficiency. Comparison, he writes, is not merely unfair, but structurally false. It measures one's internal struggle against someone else's external performance. It erases context, compresses time, and mocks effort. Nothing feeds self-doubt more efficiently. The turning point of the chapter arrives when Tracy reframes failure. He argues that failure is not a verdict, but a rehearsal. Every achievement is preceded by attempts that were, at the time, imperfect or embarrassing. What the saboteur calls proof of inadequacy is in truth the structure of learning. He urges the reader to resist the temptation of internal dramatization. To fail is not to be flawed. To fail is to be participating in reality. He closes with an observation quiet in tone, yet profound in implication. The strongest individuals are not those without insecurity, but those who move forward despite its presence. Courage is not the absence of internal conflict, but the refusal to let it choose the direction of one's life. The inner saboteur does not disappear. It is managed, spoken to, exposed to daylight, and countered with action. This chapter marks a pivot from self-awareness to self-command. Tracy has diagnosed the invisible resistance within and now prepares, in the chapters ahead, to teach the mind not only how to silence it, but how to replace that inner voice with one capable of endurance, clarity, and unshaken forward motion. Chapter 6: Mental Clarity and the Discipline of Focus. Brian Tracy, having already dismantled self-sabotage in the previous chapter, now turns toward a more refined skill: the ability to think clearly, consistently, and without unnecessary noise. If the mind can defeat itself through doubt, it can also exhaust itself through clutter. In Tracy's view, intelligence is not measured by the number of thoughts a person can generate, but by the ability to direct them with precision. He begins with a simple but powerful observation. The modern mind is overstimulated. It is not starving for information, but drowning in it. The challenge, therefore, is not accumulation, but selection. To think clearly is to choose what not to think about. Tracy writes with the calm authority of experience, insisting that success belongs not to the busiest, but to the least distracted. In this chapter, he speaks of the internal fog that builds up around daily obligations, emotional residue, unfinished tasks, and unspoken worries. This fog, though invisible, reduces cognitive speed, emotional steadiness, and creative instinct. A cluttered mind cannot innovate. It can only react. And reaction, he reminds us, is the opposite of strategy. Tracy presents focus not as a mystical gift, but as a trained discipline. The mind left to wander seeks novelty rather than depth. It prefers the easy distraction over the demanding thought. Yet every breakthrough in history, from scientific theories to artistic revolutions, came from sustained concentration, from a mind willing to remain with the problem long after comfort demanded escape. He explores the anatomy of focus with particular nuance. Clarity requires silence, not just in the auditory sense, but in the emotional one. He encourages moments of deliberate stillness, time in which the mind is freed from productivity and invited to observe itself. These pauses are not escapes from thinking, but maintenance for it.
The mind, like any instrument, must occasionally be tuned. What makes this chapter especially resonant is Tracy's insistence that mental clutter is not merely intellectual, it is moral. Many people remain mentally overloaded not because they have too much to do, but because they refuse to let go of grudges, of expired ambitions, of unresolved disappointments. The brain carries what the heart cannot release. Every unprocessed memory becomes a quiet consumer of energy. He writes that clarity is ultimately an act of courage. Focus requires saying no to invitations, temptations, and distractions that flatter the ego but waste the intellect. It demands boundaries, hours without devices, conversations without haste, choices made not from impulse but alignment. The person who cannot say no cannot think deeply. In Tracy's analysis, clarity is also a social responsibility. The mind reflects its environment. A person surrounded by crisis becomes reactive. One surrounded by mediocrity becomes unfocused. One surrounded by heavy talk becomes heavy thinking. Thus, he advises a conscious cultivation of one's mental ecosystem, not to escape the world, but to engage it with intention rather than collision. The chapter reaches its emotional core when Tracy notes that most people do not fear complexity, but stillness. In stillness, the mind hears itself. In silence, truth becomes audible. Many prefer distraction because concentration reveals what is neglected, avoided, or denied. To focus is not simply to direct thought, but to confront it. He closes the chapter with an elegant symmetry. Success does not require thinking more, but thinking better. The world does not reward the frantic mind, it rewards the disciplined one. Intelligence without order becomes noise. Talent without focus becomes waste. Ambition without clarity becomes restlessness. Chapter 6 stands, therefore, as the intellectual midpoint of Tracy's philosophy. He has taught the reader how to recognize internal sabotage and now shows how to neutralize its effects through clarity and focus. What follows in later chapters will build upon this foundation. A mind that chooses its thoughts, honors its time, and commits itself to the quiet mastery of sustained attention. This is where thought becomes architecture, not weather, shaped with intention rather than allowed to pass overhead.
Chapter 7: The Power of Decision and the Weight of Commitment. In this chapter, Brian Tracy narrows his gaze to a fundamental pivot of human progress, the act of decision. He does not treat decision-making as a momentary choice, but as the architecture upon which a life is built. People do not rise because they want to, he argues. They rise because they choose to, and because they refuse to choose differently when comfort or doubt invites retreat. Tracy begins by dismantling the quiet myth that time will clarify everything. Time, he suggests, clarifies nothing unless a decision is made within it. Indecision is not neutral. It is erosion. Opportunities age. Motivation cools. Circumstances shift. The person who waits for certainty ends up watching more decisive people shape the future in front of him. Life, in Tracy's telling, is not a long corridor of equal doors, but a narrowing path one must walk or be overtaken by those who do. He describes decision-making as a psychological crossing point. Before the decision, the mind is split, negotiating internal debate, entertaining contradictory futures, rehearsing both fear and desire. After the decision, the mind unifies. It commits its resources. It becomes directional instead of cyclical. Even a difficult choice, once made, provides relief simply because inner argument ends. He examines why humans delay decisions, and his diagnosis is precise. Most people are not afraid of choosing wrong. They are afraid of living with the consequences. Commitment is weight.
it demands continuation, even when energy dips or enthusiasm bruises. Those who stand at the threshold of decision are not lazy. They are frightened of the identity shift that commitment requires. He speaks at length about the emotional noise that surrounds choice, anxiety over judgment, fantasy about safer alternatives, nostalgia for a past that no longer fits, and the seductive comfort of postponement. Postponement, he writes, is the most elegant disguise of fear. It allows the mind to pretend it is thoughtful when in fact it is simply avoiding transformation. Tracy then presents a subtler insight. Decisions shape self-image. Every time a person chooses deliberately and follows through, the psyche records this as proof of capability. Confidence is not a gift, but a memory of choosing and surviving, choosing and improving, choosing and seeing results. Conversely, chronic indecision writes a darker inner report. The self comes to believe it is not equipped to command its own direction. The chapter expands into the terrain of responsibility. Once a decision is made, ownership must follow. To decide without accountability, Tracy argues, is to engage in emotional theater rather than action. Real decision is contractual. It binds the individual to effort, to revision, to resilience. Commitment is not a declaration, but a discipline. He also confronts the illusion of perfect conditions. No decision arrives with panoramic certainty. No moment is free of risk. If one waits until there is no chance of discomfort or error, the decision will never be made. Tracy reframes action as experiment rather than verdict. The wise decision-maker adjusts without shame. Flexibility, not rigidity, is the proof of maturity. In the latter part of the chapter, Tracy addresses the moral exhaustion of second-guessing. Once a path is chosen, he advises, stop peering over the shoulder at alternatives. The mind cannot move forward if it remains in comparison with the ghosts of other possibilities. Growth requires directional loyalty. He ends with a sentiment that resonates far beyond business or productivity. Life is a finite inventory of choices. To choose is to create identity, history, consequence, and meaning. The world does not remember intention. It remembers what was carried out. Decisions, then, are not merely forks in the road, but signatures on the narrative of the self. Chapter 7 stands as a quiet but undeniable call to adulthood in its deepest form. The courage to choose, the discipline to commit, and the grace to continue even when certainty is unavailable. Here, Tracy does not offer motivational flair, but sober empowerment. He teaches the reader that decisive living is not loud. It is steady, deliberate, and responsible. This chapter closes with the unmistakable conclusion that a well-lived life is not the result of luck or timing, but of a series of choices made without collapsing into hesitation. In the chapters ahead, Tracy will connect decisiveness to action, and action to mastery, completing the interior transformation of thought into meaningful, sustained achievement.
Chapter 8. Think and Act Strategically. In this chapter, Brian Tracy emphasizes the critical importance of strategic thinking in achieving success. He explains that smart individuals do not merely react to circumstances, they anticipate problems, plan ahead, and set long-term goals. Strategic thinking involves evaluating every action in terms of its potential impact on both immediate and future outcomes. Tracy explores the concept of prioritization, highlighting that not all tasks carry equal weight. He advises focusing on the high-value activities that contribute the most toward goals, while minimizing time spent on trivial matters. This selective focus allows individuals to leverage their energy and resources more effectively, ensuring that effort translates into measurable results. The chapter also addresses the need for flexibility and adaptability. Even the most carefully crafted plans can encounter obstacles. Tracy argues that smart individuals maintain a balance between firm commitment to their goals and a willingness to adjust strategies as new information arises. By remaining both disciplined and adaptable, one can navigate complex situations with confidence. Tracy underscores the value of continuous learning and feedback as part of strategic thinking. By analyzing past successes and failures, individuals gain insights that refine their decision-making processes. He illustrates this with examples of professionals who transformed their careers by adopting a strategic mindset, identifying opportunities, avoiding pitfalls, and acting decisively. Ultimately, Chapter 8 conveys that thinking and acting strategically is not optional for those who aspire to high levels of achievement. It requires a combination of foresight, discipline, prioritization, and adaptability. By internalizing these principles, individuals can consistently make smarter choices and accelerate their path to success. Chapter 9. Develop mental agility and problem-solving skills. In this chapter, Brian Tracy emphasizes the importance of mental agility as a key trait of smart and successful individuals. Mental agility refers to the ability to think quickly, adapt to new situations, and solve problems effectively. Tracy argues that in a rapidly changing world, those who can analyze situations, identify patterns, and generate innovative solutions are far more likely to achieve their goals. Tracy highlights the role of creative thinking and critical analysis. He advises readers to question assumptions, explore multiple perspectives, and avoid rigid thinking. By approaching problems from different angles, individuals increase their chances of discovering effective and often unexpected solutions. He provides examples of business leaders who have solved complex challenges by stepping back, reassessing the situation, and creatively applying their knowledge. The chapter also underscores the value of learning from mistakes. Tracy explains that every failure carries a lesson. The ability to extract insights from setbacks strengthens problem-solving skills and builds resilience. Smart individuals view obstacles not as insurmountable barriers, but as opportunities for learning and growth. By the end of the chapter, Tracy reinforces that mental agility and problem-solving are habits that can be cultivated through practice, reflection, and continuous learning. Those who master these skills position themselves to navigate challenges confidently, capitalize on opportunities, and achieve consistent success. Chapter 10. Commit to lifelong learning. In this chapter, Brian Tracy emphasizes that lifelong learning is the ultimate key to staying smart and competitive. He explains that the world is constantly evolving, and knowledge that was sufficient yesterday may become obsolete tomorrow. Therefore, continuous learning and skill development are essential for sustained personal and professional growth. Tracy stresses the importance of self-education. He encourages readers to read books, attend seminars, take courses, and actively seek out new information relevant to their fields. By dedicating time every day to learning, individuals can expand their expertise, stay ahead of trends, and anticipate changes that may affect their goals. The chapter also highlights the value of learning from mentors and peers. Tracy explains that surrounding oneself with smart, experienced, and successful people provides opportunities to absorb wisdom, gain different perspectives, and avoid common mistakes. Collaboration and knowledge sharing enhance the learning process and accelerate personal growth. Tracy further emphasizes practical application of knowledge. Learning is not only about acquiring information, it's about implementing it effectively in real-world situations. He provides examples of individuals who transformed their careers and lives by consistently applying what they learned, turning theory into measurable results. Finally, Tracy underscores the mindset required for lifelong learning: curiosity, discipline, and humility. Smart individuals recognize that no matter how much they know, there is always room for growth. By embracing learning as a lifelong habit, they continually sharpen their thinking, improve decision-making, and maintain a competitive edge in all areas of life. Conclusion: mastering your mind for success. In conclusion, Brian Tracy reinforces that intelligence and success are not fixed traits, but skills that can be developed. The book emphasizes that by committing to strategic thinking, mental agility, effective problem-solving, and lifelong learning, anyone can enhance their personal and professional performance. Tracy reminds readers that achieving success requires discipline, focus, and deliberate practice. It's not enough to acquire knowledge; one must apply it consistently, make informed decisions, and learn from both successes and failures. By combining these habits, individuals can navigate challenges effectively, seize opportunities, and accelerate their path to achievement. He also stresses the importance of self-reflection and continuous improvement. Smart individuals regularly evaluate their actions, seek feedback, and refine their strategies. This ongoing process ensures they stay adaptable and competitive in an ever-changing world. Ultimately, Get Smart is a guide to unlocking your potential, thinking critically, and acting decisively. It demonstrates that intelligence is not just what you know, but how you think, learn, and apply your knowledge to achieve meaningful results. If you found this summary insightful and want to become smarter and more effective in your personal and professional life, like this video, subscribe to Read and Rise, and turn on notifications to access more life-changing book summaries that help you think strategically, solve problems, and achieve success.